Morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Jerry, for the kind introduction and for using at least half my ideas from my speech there in that brief introduction. But I'll adjust as I go along. First of all, can I welcome everybody here? I'd like to particularly welcome our international colleagues who've joined us from many parts of Europe, but specifically the MacCraith project partners from Johannes Kepler University in Austria, from the University of Oslo in Norway, and what used to be Shankara but now Pamukkale University in Turkey. Did I get that right? Yes. There you go. You're all particularly welcome. You've travelled a distance, and finally the rain has stopped in Dublin this week, so at least the sun is shining. I'd like to also to acknowledge some of our friends and colleagues from closer to home who are attending this symposium. Dr. Paddy Shevelin is here, and his colleagues from the DCU Equi Research Partnership in Schools in Northern Ireland. Delighted that you could be with us, as well as members of the Northern Ireland Education Authority and the Education and Training Inspectorate of Northern Ireland. Really grateful and very pleased with that cross-border linkage, all-Ireland linkage. Also delighted to welcome staff from the PDST, the support services of the Department of Education and Skills and the Department of Education and Skills Inspectorate here in the South. And welcome also representatives from our research partner schools, and I know you mentioned Luttrellstown already, and colleagues from ETB as well. So a great diverse grouping here, gathering in the Seamus Heaney Lecture Theatre. I really have just 2 or 3 messages. The first is just to situate this in the university itself, in DCU itself. We're a young university. We turned 40 next year. So in 1980, we took in 192 students into the university, and now we're at 17,500 students. And as Ireland's fastest growing university by far, and really responding to not only a demographic bulge coming through the system and much more to come, but also a very changed Ireland. And in that regard, and very relevant to what you're doing on our own campuses, and we've 3 academic campuses in this region, we have typically over 115 different nationalities. So of the 17,500 students, about 3,500 of those are non-Irish. But I say 115 to 120 nationalities in any given year. Many of those, about 50% of those, living in Ireland and have their home in Ireland. So it reflects a very, very changed Ireland, so that over the past 2 decades, we've gone from what was largely a mono-ethnic culture to what Ernst & Young, EY, now describe as the second most globalised country in the world. And our education system has to adjust and respond to that. And one of the challenges actually we have, and what we've created here on this campus, Ireland's first ever faculty of education. And it surprises people when you tell them that in over 400 years of universities on this island, there has never been a university faculty of education. We have created one very deliberately and very strategically, and we now have approximately 4,500 students studying education on this campus at all levels of the education continuum, and we're educating teachers in a research-intensive environment across all those levels. But one of the key challenges that's relevant to what you're doing is the actual almost homogeneous composition of teachers, and particularly in primary schools. So in Ireland, we have a number of advantages. The students applying for primary teacher education come from the top 15% in terms of performance of students. Top 15%. That's a huge asset. But over 80% of those are female, and the amount of diversity in that grouping is really small. So one of the things we're trying to do in terms of both economic diversity and, as you said, ethnic diversity, is to try and reach out into the various new Irish communities, so that the teaching body reflects the diversity of broader society. And as you'd understand, that's non-trivial, but very, very important. So we've special initiatives, as Jerry said, around being a university of sanctuary and working with immigrants and refugees. I think there's 5 universities have signed up and designated now, Jerry, so we're delighted. We were the first out, but delighted that many others are doing the same. We have special scholarships now in place for lone parents, for people from the travel or our Roma community as well, but all the time looking for ways so that, ultimately the aim should be that the diversity of society is reflected in the diversity of the teaching population itself at all levels. but that's a long pathway. So we created the Institute of Education here on this campus, research intensive, a number of major research centres, and EQUI is one of those. We established a new centre for early childhood education. I'm delighted to see Ireland's first chair in early childhood education, Professor Matthias Urban, has joined us for this event as well. A chair in assessment as well. We established a chair in assessment about 4 years ago, the Prometric Chair in Assessment, and Professor Michael O'Leary heads that up. Believing as we do that assessment is, as you would understand better than I do, but is one of the major drivers of both teaching and learning behaviour. And for those of you not from Ireland, just these 2 weeks we have our major national examination for secondary schools, which is a major determining factor for students going on to the third level or to universities. But it is the best and worst example in equal measure of a system that drives probably 6 years of learning behaviour and 6 years of teaching behaviour. And so the assessment modalities is something that we worry about hugely and believe for many reasons needs to be reformed and reform itself. And we're working with government in that regard. So let me talk a little bit about EQUI as well, the Irish partner in the MacCraith project. Obviously a multidisciplinary centre specialising in evaluation of educational policies, programmes and personnel, critically important. We are particularly pleased that the centre has this focus on culturally responsive evaluation, and apart from the partnerships across Europe, the link into the centre, the CREA Centre at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, I think we're very pleased with, and Professor Stafford Hood is an adjunct professor here with us as well. But linking this to the broader value system of the university, there's two major values that we stand for, and as a university we don't just write down values and forget about them, we try to live up to them. And the two that are most relevant to what you're dealing with, I think, are educational opportunity and social justice. And we believe that particularly in access to higher education, it should be about your ability alone. And we have a whole broad range of initiatives to actually address that. And Jerry mentioned in terms of socio-economic disadvantage, we've over 1,300 students in our university who would not be here were it not for our intervention and support. We also became last year designated in this lecture theatre actually the world's first autism-friendly university. So we've created a whole broad range of supports for students on the spectrum to allow them to flourish both socially and academically at university. It was a challenge, the details of which I had not appreciated until we started working with the autism advocacy group, as I am. Also, the unemployment rate for young people with autism is close to 90%, 90. And we're obviously, as part of higher education, working with the employability aspects of those. So that whole notion of educational opportunity, and it brings us to the whole migration issue that the University of Sanctuary, we set out to reach out to the horribly named centres for direct provision, one of which is just about 20 minutes north of us here, immigrants and refugees, and give them access to higher education. And you really see the impact of pathways to freedom, pathways to prosperity from those students when we talk to them. So when I was asked to give a few words here this morning, I was struck by some of the statistics in your very impressive report, and figures like the population of Ireland containing 420,000 non-Irish people. This is 2017, nearly double what it was in 2002. UN figures of nearly 258 million international migrants in 2017. 14% of those under 20 years of age. So massive numbers that we're dealing with, and so on. So I think what you're dealing with in terms is so critically important in dealing with the challenge of ensuring equity for all students, regardless of their background in the education system. And I think that's why I say value so much. That's why I was so pleased to come here today. What you are trying to do in terms of addressing that issue in a world where mass migration is increasingly dominant, meeting the educational needs of culturally diverse societies is just critical. The whole well-being of society, the whole cohesiveness of our society is something we have to value and cherish. And the events of the past few days in terms of celebrating D-Day and so on bring us back to a time in history when things were pretty bad in terms of what we're trying to do in terms of a cohesive and integrated and peaceful world, the need for equity of participation in the classroom for students of all cultural backgrounds is part of that cohesiveness in society. And that's why I applaud you for what you're doing. Proud of what you're doing here, Jerry and colleagues, and Martin and Joe, but proud to host all of you as part of the MacCraith project. And I know you're coming to the end, but I hope that you can get follow-on funding for this and continue the very good work you are doing. What you're doing is very complex. I understand that, and that's why I say workshops like this are very important. The report that you put together, very significant, and a lot of the resources that you've been developing, the toolkit to provide strategies for educators to implement culturally responsive assessment, the module for initial teacher education at second level, the online training module. I won't go through them all. Very much welcome that you're doing them, because these are practical outcomes. So in conclusion, I very much applaud what you're doing. I want to thank all of the contributors today, in particular our keynote speakers, Fionnuala Ní Cashel and Ciara Ryan from Lutterstown Community College. And very much welcome that you actually have those at the coalface, the teachers here, because they know exactly what the issues are, and to have that dialogue between the practitioners at the coalface and the academic researchers, I think is critically important in actually getting the articulation of the problem statements properly addressed. And that's where innovation happens, when you get that clear articulation and researchers can address real problems. So I want to thank, on behalf of DCU, Deirdre O'Brien and our colleagues from Lurgas, the Irish National Agency for the Erasmus Plus programme, for the invaluable role they've played in facilitating the work of DCU and our partners across Europe. And finally, I want to congratulate everyone involved in this really excellent project, and to celebrate the fact that we're in the Seamus Heaney Theatre. Just one of, I often quote from him, he was a great friend of this university. The very first task I had in terms of honorary doctorates was to confer an honorary doctorate in Seamus. We spent a wonderful day with him here, and there's a beautiful portrait of him outside this theatre. But one of the many wise things he said is this: if you have the words, there's always a chance that you'll find the way. So you're creating the words and what you're doing through the research and dialogue, but you're providing the words also for the students who will benefit from the research you're carrying out. So I wish you well. Congratulations and good luck with your workshop. Thank you very much.